A police captain plants 3 kilos of cocaine in a black public defender's car, smiling as her career, her freedom, and her father's legacy collapse in the rain. But as the cuffs tighten, she stares him down and whispers, "I've been recording you for 6 months. What happens next will shatter everything." Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story you won't want to miss. Rain pounded the windshield in relentless sheets, drumming against the glass with a rhythm that matched Olivia Turner's exhaustion. Her eyes burned from hours in the cramped courthouse, fighting for clients who had no one else. The dashboard clock glowed 9:47 p.m., reminding her that she hadn't eaten since breakfast. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, trying to shake the weight of another day spent pleading for fairness in a system designed to crush the people she represented. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Through the flicker of stormlight, she glanced at the screen. It was a message from her younger sister Maya. "Still coming for dinner Sunday?" Olivia smiled faintly. The thought of Sunday dinner at Maya's small apartment was a brief lifeline, something normal amid the chaos. She tapped back a quick yes at the next stop sign before focusing on the slick road ahead. She deliberately avoided the main routes. Years in Millfield had taught her that the east side was patrolled heavily at night. Random checkpoints had a habit of targeting people who looked like her. Black, professional, but still suspicious in the eyes of a police force that had made profiling a way of life. She preferred these back streets, winding through dark stretches of shuttered stores and decaying houses. Here at least, she could drive without the constant shadow of flashing lights. The wipers fought a losing battle as lightning split the horizon. She thought of her father, Detective Thomas Turner, who had driven these same roads years ago. The memory of his face before the scandal, proud and unbroken, haunted her every time she passed the intersections he once patrolled. They had accused him of corruption, planted evidence in his locker, and called it suicide when the shame became unbearable. Olivia never believed it. Tonight, with fatigue pressing down on her, she could almost hear his voice reminding her to be careful, to never underestimate what power will do to protect itself. The rain intensified and her headlights caught the gleam of slick pavement. She was 10 minutes from home when it happened. A sudden flare of red and blue light filled her rearview mirror. Olivia's stomach clenched. "Not tonight," she whispered under her breath. But the siren wailed once, sharp and commanding. Her heart pounded as she guided her car to the curb. Her pulse quickened when she saw the silhouette emerge from the patrol car. Even in the rain, she recognized the tall, broad-shouldered figure, the immaculate uniform, the deliberate stride. Captain Frank Reed. He was the last man she wanted to see on this deserted stretch of road. He was more than a police captain. He was the man who had blocked every attempt to clear her father's name. His presence was no coincidence. This wasn't a random stop. As Reed approached, Olivia's throat tightened with a mix of dread and inevitability. She adjusted her blazer, forcing her breathing into rhythm. If Reed was here, then the night was already a trap. Rain streamed down Reed's hat brim as he tapped on her window, flashlight beam flooding her face. His tone was smooth, practiced, almost courteous. "License and registration, Miss Turner." Olivia rolled down the window, forcing her voice steady. "What's the reason for the stop, Captain Reed?" "Your tail light's out. Dangerous in this weather," he replied, leaning closer as if to peer inside her car. Olivia knew her car as well as she knew her own heartbeat. She had checked the lights before leaving her office. They had been working perfectly. She handed over her documents, meeting his eyes with practiced calm. Years of courtroom battles had taught her how to mask fear with discipline. But beneath that stillness, her mind raced. He wasn't alone. She could see movement in her mirrors. A second car slid silently into position behind his, its lights off. Officer Daniels stepped out, a man whose reputation for brutality preceded him. He moved with purpose, heading straight toward her trunk. A third unmarked vehicle parked across the street, and another officer emerged. Rodriguez, younger. his hesitation almost visible even from a distance. The officers for a broken tail light. The absurdity was obvious, but Reed's smile remained fixed, sharp as a blade. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "Am I being detained?" Olivia asked, her voice tight but unwavering. "Just a routine check, counselor. You understand procedure." Reed's hand rested casually on his holster. "Unless, of course, you've got something to worry about." Her chest tightened. There were no cameras at this intersection, no late-night pedestrians braving the storm. The rain swallowed sound, and the streets were empty. She unlocked her door slowly, knowing that refusal would only give him the excuse he wanted. Her heels sank slightly into the wet asphalt as she stepped out, rain soaking through her blazer almost instantly. Reed positioned himself between her and his cruiser, creating a visual barrier that blocked her from seeing Daniels clearly. "I'm going to search your vehicle," he announced, his tone making it clear this was no request. "You don't have probable cause," Olivia countered automatically, her legal training kicking in despite the adrenaline pounding through her veins. "I don't consent to a search." Reed's expression hardened as his voice dropped into a tone only she could hear. "I detected the odor of marijuana when you rolled down your window. That gives me probable cause." It was a lie as smooth as the rain running down his face, a line he had probably used 100 times before. Olivia's stomach dropped. She tried to step toward the trunk, but Reed extended an arm, blocking her path. "Stay where you are, Miss Turner." Behind Reed, Daniels crouched at the trunk, his movements shielded by his body. Through the distortion of rain, Olivia saw him slip a hand inside his jacket. In one swift motion, he pulled out a plastic bag. The storm provided cover as he leaned into the trunk, lifting the carpet lining just enough to slide the package beneath. The gesture was fast, practiced, invisible to anyone not looking directly at him. Her chest constricted. She shouted over the storm, her voice raw. "What are you doing? This is illegal! You can't plant evidence!" Reed ignored her, his gaze cold and unyielding. Rodriguez shifted uneasily by the patrol car, his eyes flicking between Olivia and the officers. For a heartbeat, his face betrayed something almost human. Hesitation, maybe even shame. "Captain," Daniels called out, his voice loud enough to carry, "you might want to take a look at this." Reed allowed the faintest twitch of a smile before composing himself into the mask of a stern professional. He strode toward the trunk, peered inside, and lifted a Ziploc bag glistening under the flashlight's beam. 3 kilos, neatly packed, street value over $150,000. He turned toward her with performative disappointment. "Ms. Turner, you have a serious problem." Olivia's blood turned to ice. "That's not mine. You know damn well that's not mine." She fought to keep her voice above the rain, fury mixing with panic. "You just planted that." Reed's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. He gestured to Daniels. "Cuff her." Daniels moved quickly, grabbing her wrists with unnecessary force. The cold metal bit into her skin as he snapped the handcuffs shut. Olivia struggled against his grip, rain mixing with the heat of humiliation burning in her chest. "This is a frame job. You're doing this because of my father, because I've been investigating you." Reed leaned close, his words dropping into a whisper meant only for her. "Your father couldn't prove anything either. Look how that ended for him." The words struck like a knife. Daniels shoved her toward the patrol car, her shoulders slamming into the doorframe as she stumbled into the back seat. The storm blurred the world outside, but she forced her voice into the night, loud enough for anyone at all, to hear. "I know exactly what you're doing, and I've been recording you for 6 months." The cruiser door slammed shut, the rain drowned everything else. The steel bars clanged shut behind Olivia, sealing her in the holding cell, but her mind wasn't trapped in that moment. It was racing backward, pulled into the shadows of her past, where the name Turner once stood for honor. Her father, Detective Thomas Turner, had been the man every child in their neighborhood pointed to with pride. A black detective in Millfield who carried himself with dignity, who walked the streets with a sense of belonging. who told his daughters that justice, though flawed, was worth fighting for. She could still picture him on their porch, uniform crisp, voice steady, telling Maya bedtime stories about courage and reminding Olivia to always keep her head high. Then came the accusations. Overnight, everything they thought they knew about him collapsed. A stash of cocaine found in his locker, allegations of collusion with dealers he had sworn to dismantle. He insisted it was a lie, that he was being set up, that someone in the department was framing him. Olivia was only in law school then, but she saw the way the city turned its back on him. Colleagues avoided his gaze. Neighbors stopped speaking when he passed. His name became poison. And then, the unthinkable. He was found dead, the official report calling it suicide. A note that didn't sound like him. A story that didn't fit. Olivia refused to believe her father had chosen to leave. Her gut told her the truth, that his enemies had cornered him and silenced him the only way they knew how. But every attempt to reopen the investigation was blocked. Internal Affairs launched 3 inquiries, and each time, Captain Frank Reed shut them down. At his funeral, the rain fell just as hard as it did the night she was arrested. Olivia remembered standing at the graveside, fists clenched, Maya weeping beside her, and she remembered Reed stepping forward, offering her a folded flag with one hand, while leaning in close with a whisper no one else could hear. "Your father chose the easy way out. Smart man." The venom of those words had burned into her soul. In that instant, she understood. Reed wasn't just another cop. He was the architect of her father's downfall. That whisper had followed her through the years. Every courtroom battle, every night spent combing through old case files, every moment she defended another client targeted by the same system that killed her father. It was all Reed's shadow pressing down on her. Tonight, when he framed her with drugs, she realized he hadn't just returned to finish what he started with Thomas Turner. He wanted to bury the entire Turner legacy. Olivia built her career on the ashes of her father's name. After his death, she could have chosen distance, abandoning the system that had destroyed him. Instead, she dove straight into its belly. 8 years as a public defender in Millfield had taught her that the courtroom was another kind of battleground. Every day, she walked into rooms where her clients were presumed guilty before opening their mouths. Most were poor, most were black or Latino, many had been chewed up by the same machinery of injustice her father once warned her about. She fought for them relentlessly. She exposed sloppy police work, called out unconstitutional searches, challenged unreliable witnesses. Her spotless record of professionalism earned her respect from judges and gratitude from clients. But from the police, she earned only resentment. Officers whispered about her in the hallways, muttering that she was soft on crime, that she made their jobs harder, that she was a troublemaker like her father. The more victories she scored, the more hostile their glares became. But Olivia never flinched. Each time she stood beside a client, she saw her father in their faces, someone fighting against odds stacked by men like Reed. She wore her reputation like armor, letting it fuel her resolve. Yet beneath the strength, the wound never healed. She had never been able to clear her father's name. The injustice gnawed at her, a reminder that justice wasn't blind, it was willfully cruel. Millfield itself reflected that cruelty. Once a booming industrial town, it had rotted into something harder. Empty factories lined the riverfront, unemployment soared, and racial divides deepened. The police patrolled with military precision, their presence more intimidation than protection. The courthouse was a factory line, arraignment, plea deal, conviction. Quick, efficient, merciless. The people who lived on the east side, her people, were treated as expendable bodies moving through a system that saw them as statistics. And through it all, Captain Reed stood as a celebrated figure. To the press, he was a savior. A captain with silver-streaked hair, an immaculate uniform, and a polished smile. He appeared at charity events, posed for photographs with children, gave speeches about law and order. The papers praised him for reducing crime by 30%, for cleaning up Millfield streets. His community outreach programs were splashed across headlines, his face plastered on billboards. To the public, Reed was the hero the city needed. But Olivia knew better. Behind those staged photos, he ran the department with iron loyalty. Internal affairs never touched him. Investigations vanished when they got close to his circle, and always, in the back of her mind, she knew what he had done to her father. That was why, as much as she defended the poor, she had also quietly been building something else, an investigation of her own. For months before her arrest, Olivia had been collecting pieces. She noticed patterns in cases where drugs appeared mysteriously, in defendants who swore the substances weren't theirs, in arrests that happened without cameras or witnesses. She started keeping her own files, cross-referencing police reports, noting officers' names that repeated across incidents: Daniels, Rodriguez, always orbiting Reed's shadow. Late nights, after finishing her public defender caseload, she sat at her desk with stacks of documents and maps spread before her. She charted dates, times, locations. She filed requests for body camera footage that was conveniently missing. She listened to clients tell stories of evidence appearing out of nowhere, of being stopped for reasons that made no sense. The picture was becoming clear. Reed and his men weren't just enforcing the law. They were manipulating it, exploiting it, weaponizing it against anyone who challenged them. Olivia's instincts screamed that the same machinery that destroyed her father was still grinding forward, more ruthless than ever. She prepared quietly, buying recording devices, encrypting files, storing backups in hidden locations. Every step she took, she remembered Reed's whisper at the funeral. He wanted her to break like her father. Instead, she sharpened her resolve into steel. She told herself that if Reed ever came for her, she would not be blindsided. She would be ready. She knew one day it would happen. A woman like her, defending the people Reed wanted silenced, digging into cases he wanted forgotten, it was inevitable. That night on the rainy street, when his shadow filled her car window, she knew the confrontation she had been preparing for had finally arrived. She thought of her father, of the look in his eyes when he insisted he was innocent, when he said the truth would come out. She thought of the pain of seeing his name dragged through the mud. And as Daniel slid the bag of cocaine into her trunk and Reed smirked at her, Olivia realized this wasn't just about her career or her freedom. It was about finishing what her father started. The storm outside matched the storm inside her chest. They had underestimated her before. They thought she was just another name to bury, another Turner to erase. But Olivia had made a vow in the silent hours after her father's death. One day, she would expose them. Tonight, she whispered it to herself again, even as the cuffs cut into her wrists. If he tries, I'll be ready. By sunrise, Olivia Turner's face was everywhere. Her mugshot, hastily taken with wet hair plastered to her cheeks, filled the front page of the Millfield Morning Herald. The headline was brutal: "Respected public defender arrested with $150,000, 0 cents in cocaine." Local TV stations ran the same image on loop, the tired eyes of a woman caught in a storm she hadn't created. Anchors repeated Reed's words with solemn gravity, presenting him as a vigilant captain who had once again rooted out corruption. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, microphones thrust toward anyone who had ever known her. A few colleagues stammered in shock, refusing to believe she could be guilty. Others dodged the questions, afraid to jeopardize their careers. On talk radio, callers debated whether her father's shadow had always followed her. "Like father, like daughter," one voice said coldly. The phrase stung, even through the walls of her cell. Then came the press conference. Reed stood in front of a row of American flags, polished as ever, his silver-streaked hair catching the camera lights. He clasped his hands solemnly and spoke with the practiced cadence of a man who knew the cameras adored him. It's always troubling when someone entrusted with upholding justice betrays that trust. Ms. Turner's position as a public defender makes this case particularly disappointing. We want the people of Millfield to know that no one, not even those in the legal profession, is above the law. The performance was flawless. Reporters scribbled notes as if he were a prophet. Not one asked the obvious question, why a captain personally handled a late-night traffic stop. Not one mentioned the second and third cars that had arrived in silence. Behind bars, Olivia watched the broadcast on the small television in the common area. Her stomach twisted as she saw him on screen, his face arranged in righteous sorrow, the city hanging on his every word. He had framed her, stolen her father's honor, and now turned the entire town against her. Inmates whispered around her, some jeering, others curious. She kept her face blank, even as her insides burned. At the end of the press conference, District Attorney Wilson stepped to the podium. His face was equally grave. "Effective immediately," he announced. "Miss Turner's license to practice law in this county is suspended pending investigation. All of her current cases will be reassigned." The words landed like a hammer. In a single breath, Reed and Wilson had not only tainted her reputation, but dismantled her work. Dozens of clients, poor, voiceless, already clinging to her as their only hope, were left defenseless. Cases she had built for months would now collapse. It was no accident. Reed hadn't just wanted her arrested, he wanted her silenced, her work erased, her community left adrift. The shift from respected attorney to disgraced inmate happened with stunning speed. Olivia, who had walked freely through Millfield's jail countless times to consult with clients, now entered the same halls in shackles. Guards she had known for years averted their eyes. Some smirked, as if enjoying the reversal of power. The humiliation was deliberate. She was stripped of her blazer and jewelry, given an orange jumpsuit and slip-on shoes, processed with a cold efficiency designed to reduce her from attorney to number. Her belongings, including her watch, were logged and bagged. She watched the officer fumble through her purse, suppressing the urge to shout about what he was touching, what he might miss. She kept silent, knowing the real fight was only beginning. The cell they placed her in was no accident. She was assigned to Block D, a wing notorious for housing women caught in drug cases. As the door opened, she met the steady gaze of her new cellmate, Tasha Williams. Tasha was in her 30s, with weary eyes that carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. She shifted on the thin mattress, studying Olivia with a mix of curiosity and recognition. "Never thought I'd see you on this side," Tasha said quietly once the guards left. Olivia sat on the opposite bunk, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I didn't do this." "None of us did," Tasha replied bitterly. "That's the problem." In the dim light of the cell, Olivia listened as Tasha began to talk. She had been a nurse at Millfield General. One night she treated a teenager beaten nearly to death in police custody. She filed a report, as protocol required. 2 weeks later, Captain Reed pulled her over. A bag of meth appeared in her glove compartment. She had been in jail ever since. Olivia's chest tightened as the pieces aligned with what she had already suspected. Tasha was one of many. Reed had been planting drugs on anyone who challenged him, anyone who threatened the empire he built behind the facade of law and order. Tasha listed names in the darkness: Johnson, Martinez, Lopez, all minorities, all people who had dared to stand up, to speak, to resist. "Every single one of us crossed Reed," she said, "and every single one of us ended up here." The confirmation hit Olivia like a blow. Her father hadn't been the first, and she wasn't the last. Reed's corruption wasn't a personal vendetta, it was a system. As midnight came, flashlights swept the cell, lingering on Olivia's face longer than necessary. She could feel the extra eyes on her, the message unspoken but clear. They were watching. She was dangerous to them. In the days that followed, Olivia endured the full weight of public shame. Newspapers speculated about whether she had been protecting clients who were really dealers. Commentators dissected her father's death, suggesting corruption ran in the blood. She was branded guilty before trial, her silence twisted into proof. But inside the jail, as Tasha whispered stories of others who had been set up, Olivia's anger transformed into clarity. Reed hadn't exposed her, he had exposed himself. By targeting her, a public defender with a spotless record, he had made a mistake. He believed her arrest would silence her investigations. Instead, it confirmed them. "They think this breaks me," she murmured one night, staring at the ceiling. "It doesn't. It confirms everything I suspected." Tosh had turned on her side, her eyes catching the dim light. "Then you're more dangerous to him than your father ever was." Olivia thought of the files she had hidden, the recordings she had made, the contingency plans she had set in motion. Reed believed he had stripped her of power. What he didn't know was that she had been preparing for this exact scenario. Her career was gone, her reputation smeared, but she was still standing, and she was not alone. Inmates began approaching her quietly, sharing their stories, their suspicions, their pain. Patterns emerged with frightening clarity. Officers who always seemed to be at the same stops, evidence that vanished from the log, testimonies altered under pressure. Each detail strengthened the mosaic Olivia had already been piecing together in secret. The humiliation was sharp, seeing her name dragged through the mud, hearing whispers from guards who once respected her. Yet in the pit of despair she found something else: resolve. Reed had underestimated her. He had mistaken her father's daughter for someone who would fold under pressure. Every headline calling her a disgrace, every inmate who whispered "Me too," every memory of her father's ruined reputation. It all became fuel. Olivia no longer fought just for herself. She fought for every person Reed had crushed, every family torn apart, every innocent framed to protect a corrupt empire. She knew the fight ahead would be brutal. Reed held the press, the police, the district attorney, even judges in his pocket. But Olivia had something he didn't: the truth. And a fire inside her that no cell, no headline, no humiliation could extinguish. As the storm outside passed and the jail grew quiet, Olivia closed her eyes and repeated the vow she had carried since the day of her father's funeral. One day, the truth will come out. One day, his shadow will fall. And now, she thought, that day has begun. The jail visitation room buzzed with the low murmur of conversations, punctuated by the clang of metal doors and the shuffle of chains on linoleum. Olivia sat at a table, the phone pressed to her ear, waiting for her court-appointed attorney to arrive. Instead, a man she didn't recognize slid into the seat across from her. He had sharp features, close-cropped hair, and eyes that seemed to scan the room, even while fixed on her. He picked up the receiver slowly, as if testing it for traps. "I don't know you," Olivia said flatly into the phone. "I know you," he replied. His voice was quiet but steady. "Your record. Your father's case, too." Her body stiffened. "Then you know I'm not guilty." He leaned closer, lowering his voice further. "I also know Captain Reed's fingerprints are all over this, same as your father." Olivia narrowed her eyes, studying him carefully. "Who are you?" "James Foster, transfer from Chicago PD 3 months ago." He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Officially, I'm here to fill gaps in manpower. Unofficially, I'm here because Reed's reputation doesn't match the numbers. Too many gaps in evidence, too many cases that don't add up." Olivia's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain composed. She'd been burned before, trusted too soon. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're not crazy," Foster said bluntly. "You're right, and your father was too." The words nearly knocked the air out of her lungs. For years she had carried the weight of doubt, the suspicion that maybe her father's crusade had been reckless, that maybe she was following a ghost. Hearing Foster say it with such certainty lit a spark inside her chest. But she kept her face guarded. "You expect me to believe you're some kind of savior? For all I know, you're part of this setup." Foster's expression didn't change. He glanced at the guard in the corner, then slid a folded card across the table. "I'm not here to save you. I'm here to end Reed. Memorize the number. Don't keep the card. Burn it if you have to. If you want to prove what you already know, call me." Olivia stared at the card, a personal number. It could be a trap. It could also be the first real lifeline she had seen since her arrest. The guard called out that time was up. Foster stood smoothly, giving her one last look. "You're not alone, Turner, not anymore." Olivia sat frozen long after he left, her heart pounding. She had walked into that room expecting another lecture about plea deals and impossibility. Instead, she walked out with the flicker of hope that cracks were forming in Reed's empire. That night, Olivia replayed the conversation over and over in her head. Foster's words rang with a conviction she hadn't heard in years. Yet her father's death was proof enough that allies could be illusions. She needed confirmation. She needed to see those cracks for herself. Meanwhile, outside the jail, Detective Marcus Harris sat in his car, staring at the glowing screen of his burner phone. Rain dotted the windshield, blurring the streetlights. His hands shook as he scrolled through contacts, his thumb hovering over the name Foster. He had saved the number days earlier, after hearing rumors that Chicago had sent someone in. He hadn't called yet. He wasn't sure if he had the courage. For 18 years, Harris had worn the Millfield badge. He had watched Reed rise through the ranks, had seen him cover mistakes, twist stories, rewrite events until black became white and lies became truth. At first, Harris told himself it was loyalty, that keeping quiet was survival. But then came Thomas Turner. Harris remembered the day Reed ordered him to log evidence that didn't belong, to sign his name on reports that would bury a good man. Harris did it, convincing himself he had no choice. A week later, Turner was dead. Harris had carried the guilt like a stone in his chest ever since. Now Olivia was behind bars. Reed had struck again, and Harris could feel the noose tightening around his own neck. He had hoped he could retire quietly, 3 years to go until his pension, but Reed wasn't letting anyone walk away. The operation had grown too big, too greedy. Harris saw the cars Reed drove, the houses he couldn't afford on a captain's salary. He heard whispers about shipments moving through the warehouse district at night. He knew where the bodies were buried. And for the first time, he wondered if silence was worth the price. Inside her cell, Olivia noticed the way guards lingered longer at her door, the way other inmates glanced toward her before quickly looking away. Word was spreading. Some women approached her cautiously, whispering that they too had been framed, their arrests eerily similar to hers. She listened, storing their details in the vault of her mind. Each story was another crack in Reed's facade. The following morning, during meal distribution, Harris appeared in the cafeteria, clipboard in hand. He avoided her eyes as he checked off names, but his hesitation was clear. When he finally glanced her way, their gazes locked. In that brief second, Olivia saw it. The guilt, the conflict, the unspoken knowledge. He didn't speak, but the message was clear. He knew something. He had always known. As Harris left, Olivia leaned closer to Tasha, her voice low. "Reed's empire isn't as solid as it looks." Tasha frowned. "What makes you say that?" "Because even his own men are starting to crack." The next week brought another meeting in the visitation room. This time it was her attorney, Price, but tucked among the documents he slid her was a scrap of paper written in unfamiliar handwriting. Clearwater Holdings, Unit 17. Her chest tightened. She had heard Tasha mention that name in passing, whispers of a warehouse where Reed's men moved shipments late at night. Seeing it written here, smuggled to her in secret, confirmed everything. Someone inside was bleeding information. Later that day, while returning from a medical check, she was escorted past the intake area where Foster stood with another officer. Their eyes met briefly. He gave nothing away, but the connection was enough to steady her. She wasn't imagining this. She wasn't alone in the storm. That night, lying on her thin mattress, she pieced it all together. Foster was on the inside, working against Reed. Harris was wavering, eaten alive by guilt, and she had the testimony of women like Tasha, victims with stories that matched her own. Reed thought he had silenced her, but in reality, he had given her a larger stage. "They think they've buried me," she whispered to herself in the dark, "but they've just dug their own grave." The words rolled through her like fire. Reed had overplayed his hand. By targeting her, a public defender with spotless credentials, a woman tied to a fallen detective whose story still haunted Millfield, he had raised the stakes too high. His arrogance was his weakness. The following morning, Reed strutted through the jail corridors, a show of force meant to remind everyone who held power. But as Olivia watched him from her cell, she didn't feel fear. She felt calculation. Every move he made, every whisper of his name, every piece of evidence that vanished, she was documenting it in her mind, waiting for the moment she could bring it all crashing down. Tasha leaned toward her and muttered, "You look like you're planning something." "I am," Olivia replied softly. "He wanted me silenced. Instead, he gave me the stage." The phrase hung in the air like prophecy. Far away, Harris sat at his kitchen table with the burner phone in his hand. He finally pressed call. The line clicked, and Foster's voice came through, steady and calm. "You ready to talk?" Harris closed his eyes. "I think it's time." It was the beginning of a fracture Reed could never repair. Maya Turner had spent the last 2 days watching her sister's name dragged across every newspaper and broadcast in Millfield. She had sat at her desk at the Gazette, forced to listen as her editor repeated the same line. "We have to cover the facts, Maya, not your feelings." But the facts were poisoned. They were Reed's facts, manufactured to bury Olivia the same way he had buried their father. She went home that evening and stood in the middle of her apartment, staring at the framed photo of her father on the bookshelf. Detective Thomas Turner in his crisp uniform, smiling like a man who believed he could outlast the shadows closing in around him. The sight burned her, not with grief this time, but with fire. She wasn't going to sit on the sidelines while Reed destroyed the last of her family. Pulling a chair to the closet, Maya reached up to the top shelf and dragged down a dusty tackle box. Her father's fishing gear had been untouched for years, kept more as a relic than anything else. She set it on the table, fingers trembling as she unlatched the rusted clasps. Inside, beneath a tangle of old lures and line, was a waterproof pouch wrapped carefully in cloth. Her breath caught. The pouch contained a small USB drive, labeled only with her father's handwriting, Clearwater. Maya slid it into her laptop and entered his old badge number as a password, then her mother's birthday, then the date of his death. Nothing worked. Finally, she typed the word Reed. The files unlocked. Her screen filled with folders, surveillance photos of unmarked police cars near warehouses, financial records tracing money through offshore accounts, transcripts of anonymous testimony about drug evidence that mysteriously vanished from official logs. Each piece of evidence pointed to something she had only suspected. Her father had been close, dangerously close, to exposing Reed's operation. He hadn't been dirty, he had been silenced. The name Clearwater Holdings appeared again and again in the documents, tied to property deeds and shell corporations. A warehouse on the west side, registered as a furniture importer, but the weight of shipments never matched the manifests. Her father had been following the money, and Maya realized now that she had stumbled onto the trail he had left unfinished. Her chest tightened. If Olivia was framed for digging too close, then Maya had just picked up the same shovel. She closed the laptop and sat in silence, listening to the hum of her refrigerator, her heart pounding so loud it drowned everything else. She whispered aloud as if her father could hear her. "They didn't bury you, they buried the truth, and I'm going to dig it out." The next morning, Maya made calls she hadn't made in years. She reached out to Sarah Parker, a friend from college who had gone on to work as a forensic accountant with the FBI before leaving under what she described as irreconcilable differences. Sarah was brilliant, methodical, and unflinching when it came to corruption. "Maya, it's been years," Sarah said when she answered, her voice guarded. "I need you," Maya replied bluntly. "It's about Olivia. And it's about my father." There was a pause on the line. Then Sarah's tone shifted. Where do we meet? By noon, Sarah was at Maya's apartment, hunched over the laptop with her glasses perched low on her nose, scrolling through file after file. "Your father was onto something huge," she muttered. "These aren't just inconsistencies, these are laundering patterns. Clearwater Holdings is washing millions through fake import records. Look at the weight declarations compared to the shipping manifests. They're smuggling product under the cover of furniture shipments." Maya's stomach turned. "And Reed's at the center of it." Sarah nodded grimly. "No doubt, the question is how far it reaches." To strengthen their team, Maya brought in Alex Rodriguez, an IT specialist she had worked with on a previous story about data breaches at City Hall. Alex was young but brilliant, a coder who thrived on dismantling digital firewalls. Within hours, he was probing into Clearwater's online presence, tracing IP addresses and pulling metadata from their publicly available documents. Together, the three of them spread files across Maya's kitchen table, piecing together a puzzle that spanned years. Shipping manifests, photos of Reed's patrol car near warehouses at odd hours, unexplained cash deposits into offshore accounts. It became clear that Reed wasn't just covering up corruption, he was orchestrating a distribution network that funneled confiscated drugs back into the streets for profit. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Sarah leaned back, rubbing her temples. If your father had this, Reed had every reason to get rid of him. And if Olivia was following the same trail, she never stood a chance once he realized it. Maya clenched her fists. "Then we finish what both of them started. We take him down." But as the resolve hardened among them, danger drew closer. That evening, when Maya returned from picking up takeout, she noticed a black sedan parked across from her building. Two men sat inside, their faces obscured by shadows, but their posture made it clear they weren't just neighbors. Her pulse quickened as she climbed the stairs, every step echoing with the realization: Reed knew. She shut the door behind her and leaned against it, heart hammering. A minute later, her phone buzzed with a new text. No words, just a photo of her walking up to her own door, taken from the street below. The following afternoon, as Maya left the Gazette under the pretense of meeting a source, Reed was waiting, his black SUV pulled alongside the curb, window rolling down with a soft hum. His face was calm, his tone almost conversational. "Ms. Turner, beautiful day, isn't it?" Maya's chest tightened, but she forced a steady voice. "Captain Reed, what a surprise." "Not a coincidence, I'm afraid." He stepped out of the car, towering over her as they walked toward a nearby park. The path was empty, rainwater still clinging to the benches. "Your sister is in serious trouble." "Because you planted drugs in her car," Maya shot back. Reed chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Allegations without evidence. It runs in the family, doesn't it?" His smile faded, his eyes turning hard. "I know what you're doing. The cabin visits, the late-night meetings with Parker and Rodriguez, the warehouse surveillance." Maya's blood ran cold. He wasn't guessing. He knew. "If you think threats will make me stop—" "This isn't a threat," Reed interrupted. "It's an offer. Convince Olivia to take the plea deal. 5 years, out in 3. She lives, you walk away. Everyone breathes easier." "And if I don't?" Reed leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Accidents happen in prison, especially to ex-lawyers who put dangerous people behind bars. You wouldn't want to lose both your sister and your father to bad choices, would you?" Her hands trembled, but she refused to look away. "You can't scare me into silence." A jogger rounded the corner and Reed straightened instantly, smile snapping back into place. "Consider your sister's welfare, Ms. Turner. You have until tomorrow." He turned and walked away, phone already at his ear. Maya reached her car with shaking hands, fumbling her keys as she slid inside. On the passenger seat lay a manila envelope she hadn't placed there. She froze, her skin prickling. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Maya entering the cabin the night before, time-stamped. A bold red scrawl across the bottom, "We're watching." Her throat tightened as she pressed the envelope against her chest. It wasn't just her sister who was in danger now. It was her. That night she returned to the cabin where Sarah and Alex waited, spreading the photo across the table. "He knows everything," she said, her voice shaking. "And if he can reach me this easily, he can reach Olivia anytime he wants." The room fell silent, the gravity of their position sinking in. Sarah broke it first. "Then we don't back down. We double down. If Reed is watching, we make sure he sees us gathering enough evidence to bury him." Maya looked at the photo of herself, the red scrawl still burning in her mind. Reed thought fear would stop her. Instead, it solidified the fire in her veins. He had made one mistake too many. He had underestimated the Turner sisters. Maya spent the next week buried in phone calls, files, and whispered meetings. If Reed thought intimidation would stop her, he had underestimated her resolve. Sarah's meticulous spreadsheets and Alex's coded maps of financial trails had already painted one picture. But Maya knew they needed people, real voices, to expose what this conspiracy had done. Numbers could be doubted, lives could not. Her first lead came from an old protest flyer tucked in her father's files. It had Marcus Johnson's name scrawled across the top. He had once led rallies against police brutality after his younger brother died in custody. Maya tracked him down to a small apartment above a laundromat. When Marcus opened the door, suspicion clouded his eyes. "Press?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Family," Maya answered quickly. "Olivia Turner is my sister." Recognition flickered and he led her inside. The walls were bare except for a single photo of his brother, smiling in a football jersey. "They ruined me," Marcus said bitterly. "I stood in front of City Hall demanding answers, and the next week they found cocaine in my car. I'd never touched that stuff in my life. Spent 2 years in prison. By the time I got out, nobody cared about my cause anymore." Maya recorded every word, her throat tightening. It was Olivia's story, told in another voice. Next came Elena Martinez, a middle school teacher who had once testified against a cop who struck one of her students. Weeks later, she was pulled over by Daniels himself. A gun appeared in her glove compartment during the stop, and suddenly she was facing charges for possession of a firearm without a license. She lost her job, her pension, and her reputation. Elena's eyes brimmed with tears as she showed Maya the stack of rejection letters she kept in a shoebox. "All I did was speak up for a child. That was my crime. I told myself I'd never tell anyone again. But if your sister is fighting back, maybe it's time I break my silence too." Maya's hands shook as she typed her notes. Every testimony had the same rhythm. Speak up, get silenced. Protest, get punished. She began building a dossier of names. Marcus Johnson, Elena Martinez, David Cho, a Korean store owner who reported a bribery attempt, Aisha Green, a single mother who challenged a bogus eviction, all minorities, all framed, all broken. The pattern was unmistakable. Reed's corruption wasn't random, it was surgical, designed to silence the loudest voices and dismantle communities before they could unite against him. Maya realized with dawning horror that her father had collected these names too. He had seen the same line connecting them all, and it had cost him his life. She gathered Sarah and Alex at the cabin late that night, spreading photos and transcripts across the table. "This isn't about Olivia anymore," Maya said. "It never was. She's just the latest. Reed has been running a war against anyone who threatens his empire, and we finally have enough voices to prove it." Sarah leaned forward, tapping the files with a pen. "Look at the timestamps. Every victim's downfall coincides with a seizure at one of Reed's warehouses. Drugs disappear from evidence, and someone inconvenient ends up with those same drugs found in their car or home. It's not just intimidation, it's redistribution." Alex pulled up a digital map on his laptop. Red pins dotted the city, each marking a warehouse registered under Clearwater Holdings. "This isn't sloppy," he explained. "It's a system. Confiscated product goes out one door, a new shipment goes in another, and when Reed needs someone silenced, he makes sure they're caught holding the leftovers." Maya clenched her fists. So, every protester, every teacher, every community leader, he didn't just frame them, he recycled evidence to do it. The horror settled over the cabin. It wasn't just about money. Reed had weaponized the justice system itself, turning seized contraband into both profit and ammunition. Meanwhile, inside Millfield Jail, Olivia sat across from Tasha in the common area, her voice low. Tasha had been in and out of the system for years and knew the rhythms of corruption better than most. When Olivia mentioned Clearwater Holdings, Tasha's eyes narrowed. "You don't want to mess with that," Tasha whispered. "That's Reed's gold mine. Everyone knows those warehouses aren't just furniture. That's where the drugs go after they disappear from lockup. They get cleaned, repackaged, and sent back out." Olivia's heart pounded. "You've seen it?" "Not with my own eyes, but I heard the guards talk. They brag about bonuses. They say Reed has a river of cash flowing through those warehouses, and anyone who gets too close, well..." She trailed off, her gaze heavy with unspoken truth. Olivia pressed her hand against the table, steadying herself. She thought of Maya, hoping her sister was careful. Reed was more dangerous than she had imagined. The connection between victims and warehouses gave Maya's team leverage, but they needed more. Real proof, something undeniable. That's when Alex found a forgotten thread in the data, an entry in Olivia's arrest report that claimed surveillance footage from a nearby gas station was inaccessible due to technical failure. "That's the oldest excuse in the book," Alex muttered. "If it failed, it means it didn't fail." Maya drove across town to the rundown gas station, its neon sign flickering. Inside, she found an older clerk behind the counter. When she mentioned the night of Olivia's arrest, his eyes darkened with memory. "They came asking for the tapes," he said quietly. "Two cops. Said it was for the investigation, but I made a copy before handing it over. Didn't trust them." Her pulse spiked. "Do you still have it?" The clerk disappeared into the back and returned with a thumb drive sealed in a plastic bag. "Been waiting for someone to come looking. I figured one day the truth would need to come out." Back at the cabin, Maya plugged the thumb drive into her laptop. Sarah and Alex leaned over her shoulder as the footage played. Grainy night vision showed Olivia's car pulled over at the curb. Officer Daniels appeared at the trunk, glancing around nervously. His hand slipped inside his jacket, pulling out a small bag. He placed it carefully in the trunk, then slammed it shut, just as Olivia was escorted toward him. Maya's breath caught. It was undeniable, irrefutable. The proof they had been chasing wasn't just hearsay anymore. It was caught on camera. Sarah exhaled sharply. "This is it. This is the smoking gun." But even as hope surged, Alex shook his head grimly. "We have to be smart. If we leak this now, Reed buries it. He'll claim it's doctored, he'll discredit the clerk, he'll destroy anyone who touches it. We need to build the whole case and time it right." Maya nodded reluctantly. "We'll hold it, but when the time comes, this will blow everything open." For the first time, the balance seemed to tip in their favor. Yet across town, Reed was already moving. News broke the following morning that Olivia's trial had been pushed forward by 3 weeks. Her hearing was scheduled within days. Maya slammed the newspaper onto the table. "He's rushing it. He knows we're closing in." Sarah rubbed her temples. "He's trying to secure her conviction before we can get this evidence into the light. Once she's sentenced, the appeal process will bury us in years of delays." Olivia, learning of the expedited trial from her attorney, felt the weight settle like chains around her chest. Sitting in the sterile visiting room, she whispered into the phone receiver as she spoke to Maya through the glass. "He wants me gone, Maya. He's cutting off our time." "You're not gone," Maya promised fiercely. We have the footage, we have the victims, we have the warehouses. He's scared, Liv. That's why he's rushing. And when people like him are scared, they make mistakes." Olivia pressed her hand against the glass. Maya mirrored it. Two sisters divided by bars, united by fire. That night, as rain pounded the cabin roof, Maya stared at the files spread across the table. Each name, each face, each testimony formed the shape of something undeniable. They had the truth. But truth alone wouldn't save Olivia now. They needed to wield it before Reed closed the cage around her completely. Reed, meanwhile, sat in his office at the precinct, the city lights glinting off his polished badge. His phone buzzed with a message from Daniels. "Trial pushed. She won't last." Reed allowed himself a rare smile. In his mind, victory was only days away. But what he couldn't see was the storm gathering outside his fortress. A sister who refused to be silent. A team piecing together every broken life he had left in his wake. And proof, finally, that his empire was built on lies. The clock was ticking, and for the first time, Reed was the one running out of time. The clatter of footsteps echoed down the jail corridor as Olivia was led back to her cell. Her wrists ached from the cold steel of the cuffs, but her mind remained sharper than ever. That night, as the lights dimmed and the guards' laughter faded into the distance, she pulled her father's watch from its hiding place beneath her bunk. It was old and scratched, its leather strap worn from years of use. To most, it looked like a relic of a man long gone. But Olivia knew it was more. Carefully, she twisted the back panel with a coin, her heart pounding with each turn. The panel popped loose, revealing a tiny compartment no bigger than her thumbnail. Nestled inside was a micro SD card, her father's legacy, her secret weapon. Maya stared through the plexiglass the next morning as Olivia revealed the watch during their legal visit. "It's all here," Olivia whispered. "Months of recordings, my GPS logs, conversations with Reed, his threats, his meetings, everything I gathered before they caught me." Maya's eyes widened. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I had to be sure it was safe," Olivia answered. "If Reed had known, it would have disappeared, just like Dad." Her voice broke at the mention of their father, but she pressed on. "This card is the cage he doesn't see. While he thinks I'm cornered, I've been building the trap." Maya pressed her hand to the glass, her chest tight with both fear and awe. "We'll get it out. We'll make sure it burns him." But safety was no guarantee. When Foster met with Maya and Sarah that afternoon in a quiet diner on the edge of town, his face carried a grim weight. "You need to understand something," he said, lowering his voice. "Reed isn't fighting blind. He has someone inside the bureau feeding him updates. Every move we make, he knows. If you want this to stick, you can't go through the usual channels. Not yet." Sarah's pen froze over her notebook. "A mole? In the FBI?" Foster nodded. "That's why every internal investigation into Clearwater Holdings died before it began. Why your father's complaints went nowhere. Reed knew exactly who was watching. He didn't just watch." Maya felt the walls close in. "Then who do we trust?" Foster leaned in. "Each other. And the victims. That's all. Everything else is compromised." The revelation made Olivia's recordings even more dangerous, but also more vital. If the Bureau was compromised, then the evidence in her father's watch might be the only uncorrupted thread left. At the same time, Harris finally broke. The once loyal officer sat in the back of Foster's car, his head in his hands. "I can't do this anymore," he muttered. "Reed's not just dirty, he's poisoned everything. If I stay quiet, I'm as guilty as him." Foster slid a recorder across the seat. "Then wear the wire. Give us Reed in his own words." Harris hesitated, sweat dripping down his temples. But then he nodded, his voice hoarse. "For every life he destroyed, for every family he broke, I'll do it." The countdown had begun. The next 48 hours blurred into a storm of hushed meetings and encrypted calls. Harris agreed to meet Reed under the guise of discussing the upcoming trial. With the wire hidden beneath his uniform, he walked into Reed's office like a man carrying the weight of his soul. Reed didn't look up from his desk as Harris entered. "Close the door." Harris obeyed, his pulse hammering. "You've done good work," Reed said evenly. "But this Turner girl, she's slippery. And now there's chatter about missing footage, victims talking. It needs to end." Harris forced his voice steady. "What do you want me to do?" Reed finally lifted his eyes, cold and sharp. "She's being transferred before trial, state prison. My people run that place. Once she's in, she won't come out." The words seared into the wire, every syllable a nail in Reed's coffin. Harris swallowed hard. "And if her sister keeps digging?" Reeves smirked. "Let her dig. Graves are easy to fill." Harris left the office with his legs trembling. He drove straight to Foster, ripping the wire from his chest as soon as the car doors shut. "He's planning to kill her," Harris said, panic spilling into his voice. "He's not waiting for the trial. Once she's transferred, it's over." Foster's jaw tightened. "We'll protect her, but this tape, this is it. This is enough to tie him directly to the conspiracy." While Foster worked to secure the evidence, Maya rushed to tell Olivia. The two sisters met once more, faces pressed close to the glass divider. Maya's voice shook as she explained Reed's plan. Olivia listened calmly, her hand steady against the glass. "So, he's accelerating. That means he feels the walls closing in." Maya's eyes brimmed with tears. "He's going to kill you, Liv." But Olivia shook her head, a strange serenity in her gaze. "Not if I kill his empire first." Maya stared at her, unable to comprehend her calm. "How can you be so sure?" Olivia tapped the face of her father's watch. "Because while he thinks he's moving me into his cage, I've already locked him in mine. Every file, every recording, every victim. He doesn't realize how complete the picture is. He thinks he's in control, but he's already lost." Her words sent a chill down Maya's spine. She had never seen her sister so certain, so resolved. Olivia wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was preparing to end it. Meanwhile, Reed doubled his grip on the city. He ordered Daniels to tighten surveillance, to cut off Maya's movements, to watch every victim they had spoken to. He wanted no loose ends. And in a dimly lit warehouse, he stood with his trusted men, staring at pallets of boxed contraband stacked like fortress walls. "This is what they'll never touch," he said, his voice low. "As long as I control the flow, I control the city. Trials, lawyers, protests, they're nothing compared to this." But cracks had already formed in his walls, and he couldn't see them. The night before Olivia's scheduled transfer, tension hung heavy like a storm cloud. Maya sat awake in the cabin, papers scattered around her, Sarah asleep in a chair with her notebook on her lap. Alex monitored encrypted channels, scanning for chatter about Reed's men. At midnight, Maya's phone buzzed. It was Foster. "They're moving her at dawn. We don't have the power to stop the transfer, not officially, but we can intercept. Harris's wire gives us leverage, but we need to play it right." Maya clenched her jaw. "So we let her walk into their trap?" "No," Foster replied. "We let Reed believe it, and then we spring ours." Across town, Olivia lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. She knew what awaited her in state prison: guards who answered to Reed, cells that swallowed voices, a transfer van that might never reach its destination. Fear pressed down on her chest, but she refused to let it crush her. She thought of her father, of his steady hands setting that watch on her wrist the night before his death. "This is more than time," he had told her. "This is truth. Keep it safe." She touched the watch now, whispering into the dark. "I kept it safe, Dad, and now it's ready." When the guards arrived in the early morning, Olivia stood tall, chains clinking at her wrists and ankles. Her fellow inmates watched silently, some nodding as she passed. Word of her quiet defiance had spread through the cell blocks. To them, she wasn't just another inmate. She was the woman who dared to challenge Reed. As the van door slammed shut, Olivia closed her eyes. The road stretched ahead, every mile a gamble, but in her heart she carried the calm of someone who already knew the ending. At the same hour, Reed sat in his office, sipping coffee, convinced victory was within reach. "Once she's in, she won't come out," he repeated to Daniels with a cold certainty. But in the shadows, Maya, Sarah, Alex, Foster, and Harris were already in motion. Every piece of evidence, every victim's testimony, every recording on that tiny SD card. Olivia's watch was converging toward a single strike. Inside the rattling transfer van, Olivia opened her eyes, a faint smile touching her lips. "He thinks I'm trapped," she whispered to herself. "But I've already caged him." The countdown had reached its final hours. The trap was set. The night air over Clearwater was heavy, carrying the distant hum of engines along the interstate. From a vantage point half a mile away, Maya and her team huddled around a bank of monitors powered by a generator. Alex adjusted the controls of a compact drone, its silent propellers cutting through the dark as its camera locked on a warehouse on the edge of town. The building looked abandoned, its rusted roof sagging, but the steady stream of trucks pulling in told another story. "Got them," Alex muttered. On the monitor, headlights washed across the gravel lot, illuminating Reed's convoy. A black SUV pulled up first, followed by two unmarked vans. The drone's lens zoomed in, steady despite the distance. Figures emerged. Reed, Daniels, and a handful of officers still loyal to them. Maya's stomach tightened as she watched Reed supervise the unloading. Duffel bags, dozens of them, dragged from the vans and stacked in neat rows inside the warehouse. The drone's night vision feed showed the outlines of bricks sealed in plastic, bundles stacked like bricks of cash. Drugs. Millions of dollars worth. Sarah leaned closer to the monitor, whispering, "5 million, at least. Maybe more." Maya clenched her fists. "And those are supposed to be locked in evidence storage." The sight burned into her memory. Families had been torn apart while Reed and his men built an empire on what they claimed to be destroying. The cruelty of it made her chest ache. Through the drone's microphone, they caught pieces of conversation. Reed's voice was distinct, low but commanding. "Move it quickly. I don't want this sitting out all night. Daniels, double-check the manifests. Every pound has to be accounted for. The buyers don't forgive mistakes." Maya exhaled sharply, adrenaline mixing with fury. This wasn't just corruption. It was open, deliberate trafficking. "Are we recording?" she asked. Alex tapped the console. "Every second. Angle, audio, GPS overlay. They can't claim it's staged." Sarah scribbled notes furiously, her hand shaking. "This is it. This is the empire he's been running." Maya's phone buzzed quietly. "Foster," she answered, speaking in a whisper. "You seeing this?" he asked. "We've got eyes," Maya replied. "He's unloading everything, millions in seized product." Foster's voice was tight. "Stay sharp. If they spot that drone, you're compromised. We'll keep the van nearby for a quick extraction." Maya glanced at the monitors again. Reed moved like a man untouchable, his officers obeying every order with precision. But in the corner of the feed, Harris appeared, walking stiffly, his nerves visible even from the drone's altitude. "Here we go," Maya murmured. Harris was wired. Tonight, he would either save them all or go down with Reed. Harris felt sweat bead beneath his collar as he approached Reed. The wire pressed cold against his chest, every heartbeat reminding him of what was at stake. Reed's sharp eyes met his, searching for hesitation. "You look nervous," Reed said, lighting a cigarette as though the night was nothing more than business. Harris forced a chuckle. "It's a big shipment. Just making sure everything goes smooth." Reed smirked, blowing smoke into the air. "It always goes smooth when I'm running it." He gestured toward the bags being stacked. "You know what this is worth? 5 million. And by tomorrow, half of it will be in circulation again. Same streets we took it off. You want to know why I sleep at night? Because I decide where it goes and who profits." The wire caught every word. Harris's throat tightened, but he pressed further, voice low. "And the department? What if someone starts asking why seizures are disappearing?" Reed gave a cold laugh. "That's the beauty of it. Who's going to ask? The FBI? Already blind. The courts? Bought and paid for. And if anyone like Maya Turner thinks she can fight, we bury her with her sister." Harris's jaw locked. For a moment his guilt threatened to choke him. He thought of every young man locked away because of planted evidence, every family destroyed because Reed wanted another pawn. He thought of Olivia, standing alone in that courtroom, refusing to bow even as the cuffs closed around her wrists. His voice cracked when he said, "This has gone too far." Reed's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Harris swallowed hard, masking his fear. "I mean, 5 million is a lot of heat. It's risky. If someone talks, it's all of us." Reed studied him for a long moment, then laughed again, clapping him on the shoulder. "That's why no one talks. They know what happens if they do." Harris forced a weak smile, but inside he was crumbling. Every second he wore the wire, the weight of betrayal pressed heavier. But he also knew this was the only way to break Reed's grip. Across town, Maya and Sarah listened in real time, the recording piping through Foster's receiver. Sarah's hand gripped Maya's so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Mistrect," he admitted it. Sarah whispered. "Drug resale, silencing witnesses, he just laid it all out." Maya's throat was dry. "We have him. Between this and Olivia's files, we have everything." But even as triumph surged in her chest, unease coiled at the edges. Because Reed wasn't a fool, and if Harris faltered for even a second, Reed would know. On the monitor, Reed stubbed out his cigarette, motioning for Daniels. "Get the trucks ready. We're moving this tonight. I don't want it sitting when dawn breaks." Maya's pulse quickened. The window was closing. They had the proof, but now they had to get out alive. At dawn, the monitors flickered with new feeds as Reed's convoy began to move. Trucks rolled out from the warehouse, escorted by SUVs. The shipment was heading to distribution, and with it, Reed's empire would stretch further than ever. But Maya no longer felt powerless. With the gas station footage of Daniels planting evidence, Harris's wire recording, and Olivia's SD card files, they had a trifecta of proof. Proof so undeniable it could tear through every excuse Reed might throw. Still, victory was fragile. Because just as Maya copied the recordings to encrypted drives, she noticed something on the monitors. A sedan parked half a block from their cabin, another across the road. Men inside, watching. "They've found us," Maya whispered. Sarah moved to the window, heart pounding. "Reed suspects." The phone buzzed again. Foster's voice came in sharp. "Get ready. His men are tailing you. They're not going to let this stand. I'll draw them off, but you need to move, now." Maya shoved the drives into a bag, grabbing Sarah's arm. Alex powered down the equipment in seconds, but the weight of being hunted pressed hard on their shoulders. As they slipped into the woods behind the cabin, headlights swept across the gravel driveway. Reed's men had arrived. In the transfer van miles away, Olivia sensed it too. She looked out the barred window, watching the blur of trees pass by. Her instincts screamed that Reed was tightening the net, desperate to erase her before the truth saw daylight. And yet, even as danger loomed, calm spread across her face. She touched her watch again, whispering, "He thinks he's closing in, but the trap's already set." Back at the warehouse, Reed stood on the loading dock, his gaze sharp as he surveyed the departing trucks. Something gnawed at him. Harris's hesitation. The drone he thought he glimpsed out of the corner of his eye, the feeling of eyes watching. "Daniels," he growled, "tail Maya Turner. Bring me proof if she's sniffing around. And if she is, erase it." Daniels nodded, already pulling out his phone. The chessboard had shifted again. Maya and her team had proof strong enough to end Reed, but Reed had drawn his gun, aiming straight at them. The stakes had never been higher, and every step forward was a gamble with their lives. The morning of Olivia's transfer broke with a gray sky that seemed to mirror the tension hanging over Clearwater. Dew clung to the grass outside the county detention center, and the convoy of vehicles lined up looked more like a military escort than a simple prisoner transport. Reed stood at the center of it all, his uniform pressed crisp, his sunglasses hiding the storm brewing behind his eyes. He had insisted on overseeing the transfer personally, brushing aside Daniel's suggestion to delegate. Trust had evaporated in Reed's world, and if Olivia Turner was to be buried, he would make sure the dirt was thrown with his own hands. Inside the holding area, Olivia sat on a steel bench, her wrists shackled. She looked tired but unbroken. When Reed entered, flanked by two armed deputies, her eyes lifted slowly. Their gazes locked, and for a long beat, silence filled the space like a noose tightening. Reed broke it first, his voice low and dripping with venom. "You fought me every step of the way, and now look where it's gotten you, shackled, humiliated, one step from being forgotten in a prison cell." Olivia tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You always think cages belong to other people, but today you'll find out who's really trapped." Reed's smirk twitched. He leaned closer. "You think you've got leverage? All your little recordings, your sister's tricks, Harris running his mouth? I own this city. You're just a pawn who doesn't know the board." Olivia's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. She lifted her shackled wrists and tapped the face of her father's old watch. Her voice carried clarity that cut through the room. "The gas station footage, the GPS logs, every conversation you had at that warehouse. This watch holds months of your movements. Your empire isn't invisible anymore, Frank. It's on tape." Reed's jaw tightened. For the first time, cracks began to appear in the mask he'd worn for decades. His hand clenched into a fist as though squeezing the words back into silence. He leaned down, his breath hot against Olivia's face. "You think you've won? You'll die like your father, and no one will even remember your name." The words hit like a lash, but Olivia didn't flinch. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes. "That's your last threat as a free man." Reed's nostrils flared. His deputies shifted uncomfortably, sensing the raw venom in his tone. For Reed, control had always been his weapon, but here, in this cramped holding room, his certainty bled away. And Olivia could feel it. He gestured sharply. "Move her, now!" The deputies yanked her to her feet, the chains rattling. Reed marched toward the exit, his fury barely concealed. But he didn't know that the walls were already closing in, that this morning was not his triumph. It was his reckoning. The steel doors to the transfer bay groaned open, and Reed's convoy stood ready. 3 SUVs, 2 vans, all staffed with men whose loyalty had been purchased with fear and favors. Olivia was marched forward, Reed walking just a step behind her, like a hunter savoring the final walk of his prey. But before she reached the waiting van, a new sound cut through the air. The firm echo of boots and the loud, commanding voice of an unfamiliar man. "Captain Frank Reed, step away from the prisoner. You're under federal investigation." The words froze the bay. From the far side, the heavy doors swung wide, and in strode Sarah and Maya, flanking 2 federal prosecutors in suits, their badges glinting in the dim light. Behind them, Foster emerged, his hand already resting near his holster. Dozens of federal agents poured in like a tide, their presence overwhelming the space in seconds. Reed's head whipped around, fury flashing across his face. "What the hell is this?" Maya's voice rang clear. "This is the end. Gas station footage, warehouse surveillance, Harris's wire, Olivia's files. We have it all, and a warrant with your name on it." Olivia straightened despite her shackles, her eyes never leaving Reed. Checkmate. Reed's mask finally shattered, his teeth clenched, spittle flying as he shouted, "You lying traitors think you can take me down? I built this department. You're nothing without me." He lunged for his weapon, his hand pulling his sidearm free with startling speed. But Foster was faster. In one motion, he stepped forward, twisting Reed's wrist and slamming him against the van. The gun clattered to the ground, sliding under the tire. Foster pressed his forearm against Reed's back. His voice was calm, almost quiet, but it carried finality. "This is checkmate, Frank." Reed struggled violently, his voice breaking into a roar. "No, you don't get to do this to me. I made this city safe. I decide who lives, who dies." The federal agents surged forward, restraining him as Daniels and several other officers were dragged out from the convoy, their faces pale with shock. Olivia watched as one by one, the men who had terrorized her family and her city were pinned to the ground, their weapons stripped from their hands. For years, Reed had ruled through fear, but now fear gripped him. His sunglasses had fallen, revealing eyes wild with rage and desperation. He searched for some escape, some last card to play, but the board had been overturned. His empire had collapsed in an instant. Sarah stepped forward, her voice firm and clear enough for everyone to hear. "Frank Reed, you are under arrest for conspiracy, drug trafficking, obstruction of justice, and murder." The charges hung in the air like thunder. For the first time, silence replaced Reed's shouts. He looked at Sarah, then at Maya, then at Olivia, and something hollow settled in his chest. The predator was cornered. Outside, the scene unfolded before live cameras. News crews had been tipped off, their vans lining the courthouse street, as Reed and 11 of his officers were marched out in handcuffs. The sight was electric. Citizens who had lived under his shadow gathered behind barricades, their voices rising in gasps, shouts, and cries of vindication. The image was unforgettable. Reed, once the untouchable captain, his hands bound, his head bowed against the weight of flashing cameras. Officers who had once strutted with arrogance now shuffled in chains. The empire of silence and intimidation had been dismantled in the light of day. Reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved forward. "Captain Reed, do you deny the charges? How long have you been reselling seized drugs? What about the families you destroyed?" Reed said nothing, his lips pressed thin, his jaw clenched so tight it looked as though it might crack. Maya, Sarah, and Foster stood together at the courthouse steps as federal agents wheeled out evidence. Duffel bags packed with drugs, boxes of files, even stacks of marked cash seized in the raid. The sheer scale of Reed's corruption spilled into the open. Olivia was escorted out as well, still in chains, but this time, her steps carried a quiet dignity. Cameras captured her face, and in that moment, the public saw not a criminal, but a survivor who had stood against a monster. Sarah reached for her sister's hand as the marshals prepared to remove her shackles. "You did it," she whispered. Olivia's voice was steady. "We all did." The prosecutors gave their statement, laying out the charges, the evidence, the depth of Reed's betrayal. They promised sweeping indictments, reforms, and a trial that would expose every corner of his empire. The crowd roared, some weeping openly, others chanting Olivia's name. Reed was shoved into a waiting federal vehicle, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting like a man drowning in a storm he once thought he commanded. For years, he had worn the mantle of power, but now he wore only the weight of chains. Maya glanced at Sarah and then at Foster. "It's over." Foster shook his head slightly. "No, it's beginning, but this was the first step." The sun finally broke through the gray clouds, casting light over the courthouse steps as the convoy pulled away. Reed's empire of fear had collapsed, but the shadow it left behind was still heavy. For Olivia, though, this moment was more than justice, it was survival. It was the proof that even in the darkest cages, the truth could break through. She lifted her chin as the chains were unlocked, her wrists finally free. The cameras captured that moment too, and it was burned into the memory of a city that had almost lost hope. The corrupt captain had fallen, and in his place, the story of resilience and truth was rising. The courthouse that once echoed with Reed's shadow now carried a different air. The walls seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Weeks after his arrest, Olivia Turner walked through its corridors not in chains, but as a free woman. Reporters swarmed the entrance, but this time, their voices were filled with admiration, not suspicion. The announcement had just been made. All charges against her were dismissed with prejudice. She was exonerated. Her record was cleared. The same system that had once branded her a criminal now had to admit it had been wrong. Olivia stood before the judge as the decision was read. Sarah sat in the gallery, Maya at her side, both holding their breath. When the gavel struck, the sound carried finality. Olivia closed her eyes, a tear slipping free. She was no longer just the woman who fought Reed. She was the woman who won. In the weeks that followed, more dominoes fell. The state bar announced the disbarment of District Attorney Cole, the man who had looked the other way while Reed's crimes festered. Judge Grant, whose rulings had consistently tilted in Reed's favor, resigned under pressure. Investigations revealed backroom deals, suppressed evidence, and years of enabling corruption. His resignation letter tried to frame it as personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. The victory was not Olivia's alone. Dozens of wrongfully convicted men and women were released, their names finally cleared, families embraced outside prison gates, tears staining the pavement. Some had served years for crimes they did not commit, their lives fractured by a system bent to Reed's will. Now they were free. For each of them, Olivia's case had been the turning point, the moment the tide shifted. One of the first men released was Marcus Hill, a father of 3 who had been imprisoned for nearly a decade on trumped-up charges. As he stepped out into the sunlight, his daughter clung to him, sobbing. Cameras captured the moment, but for Olivia, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about justice finally taking root in ground long poisoned by corruption. Sarah squeezed Olivia's hand as they watched the news footage later that night. "You changed everything," she whispered. Olivia shook her head. "We changed everything. Maya, Foster, Harris, all of us, even the ones who didn't survive." Her voice softened as she thought of her father. Especially him. The city of Clearwater was beginning to heal, and yet everyone knew healing would take time. The scars of Reed's empire were deep, but for the first time in years, people believed those scars could fade. With Reed gone, Clearwater's police department faced a crossroads. Leadership had to change. The community demanded accountability, and so, in a decision that surprised many but felt inevitable, Detective Foster was named interim captain. At his swearing-in, the atmosphere was different from Reed's iron grip. Foster's words were simple but powerful. "This department does not belong to me. It belongs to the people of this city. Our job is not power, it's service, and we will never forget that again." He immediately implemented reforms. Body cameras became mandatory. Civilian oversight committees were established, giving citizens a seat at the table. Training programs emphasized de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and transparency. For the first time, the community saw efforts not to shield officers from accountability, but to hold them to it. Recruitment shifted too. Minority applications soared. Young men and women of color, once fearful of the badge, now saw a chance to wear it honorably. The department's ranks began to reflect the city it served. Change was slow, but it was real. Sarah walked into the precinct weeks later and barely recognized it. The atmosphere wasn't one of intimidation, but of cautious optimism. Officers spoke of rebuilding trust, of earning back what Reed had shattered. Meanwhile, Olivia and Maya turned their focus outward. They announced the launch of the Thomas Turner Justice Initiative, named in honor of their father. Its mission was clear: to provide legal aid, resources, and advocacy for victims of systemic injustice. The foundation partnered with universities, law firms, and grassroots organizations. At the press conference, Olivia spoke from the heart. "For too long, people like my father were silenced. For too long, people like me were targeted. This initiative isn't just about fighting corruption. It's about giving people the tools to fight back before it swallows them. Maya added, "We will not let another generation believe that silence is the price of survival. Justice belongs to everyone." The foundation hired Tasha Williams, the same community activist who had rallied crowds during Olivia's trial, as outreach coordinator. Her energy and connection to the people made her the perfect bridge between the streets and the courtroom. She had once shouted outside the courthouse for justice. Now, she worked to deliver it from within. Donations poured in, volunteers signed up, cases began to arrive, families needing help, individuals wrongly accused, whistleblowers too afraid to speak alone. The Thomas Turner Justice Initiative became more than an organization. It became a movement. Foster visited their office one afternoon, leaning against the doorway as Olivia and Maya sorted through files. "Your father would be proud," he said simply. Olivia looked up, holding her father's watch in her palm. "We're just finishing what he started." The work was exhausting, but it was purpose. For Olivia, every case represented not just another fight, but another promise kept. A promise to her father, to herself, to everyone who had ever been crushed under the weight of power misused. One quiet evening, Olivia drove to the cemetery. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. She walked slowly toward her father's grave, the grass crunching beneath her shoes. In her hand, she held the watch, the same one that had exposed Reed, the same one her father had worn every day of his career. She knelt before the headstone. It no longer bore the cold, dismissive label of a disgraced officer. It had been corrected finally to read, "Detective Thomas Turner died in the line of duty." The truth, carved in stone. Olivia's fingers traced the letters, and her throat tightened. She placed the watch gently on the grave. "We finished what you started," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but it carried strength. "They tried to erase you. They tried to erase me. But we're still here, and we'll keep fighting." She sat in silence for a while, the evening breeze brushing against her skin. It was not the end of the journey, but it was a moment of closure. She could breathe again. Sarah joined her, standing quietly beside the grave. After a moment, she spoke. "He'd be proud, Liv." Olivia looked up at her sister, her eyes glistening. "We didn't just survive. We built something." Before they left, Olivia took one last look at the headstone. It wasn't just a marker of death anymore. It was a reminder of legacy, of sacrifice, of the price of truth. But the work did not stop. The very next morning, as Olivia sat in the office of the Thomas Turner Justice Initiative, a new file slid across her desk. It was a tip, documents pointing to corruption in another county, another captain who had grown too comfortable in power. Olivia opened the file slowly. The details were familiar. Manipulated evidence, coerced confessions, money exchanging hands. It was Clearwater all over again, just under a different name. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling. Maya walked in, noticing the expression on her face. "Another one." Olivia nodded. "It never ends." Maya placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we keep going. Justice isn't a destination, Liv. It's a journey." Olivia's eyes softened. She closed the file but didn't put it away. Instead, she placed it at the center of her desk, as if anchoring her resolve. Outside, the city moved forward, still healing, still scarred but no longer hopeless. And inside the office, Olivia knew her father's fight lived on through her, through Maya, through Sarah, through every person willing to stand up against corruption. Justice was ongoing. It would never be easy, but it would always be worth it.